Hello and welcome back to Step Teachers Isolation Diaries. A little bit of a different intro this week is because we were joined by our special guest Michael, and he was a very busy head teacher. So you might have a little bit of audio problems. His phone does go off and his email does go off quite a few times. We hope you enjoyed this video. Sorry for the different intro. We'll be back to normal intros and outros next week. Thank you.
I think we'd scheduled to talk about remote learning. Is that your expectation, and the kind of things that you've found that have been challenging, and the kind of things that you've gone, oh, it's really good, we're going to keep this.
Sure. I think certainly when lockdown was first announced and we closed, like all schools, on the 20th of March, we had already began tentatively planning for it. I think like most heads, sorry, let me just turn that off.
All right, you're busy. It's real life.
We knew that obviously lockdown, some form of lockdown or school closures would be announced, certainly before the 20th of March. So we had already started obviously planning for that and just asking teachers and obviously middle leaders to begin obviously gathering materials and resources. Now at the time, like a lot of schools, are you guys familiar with Show My Homework?
I'm becoming familiar with it.
So just before lockdown itself, our main platform for sharing obviously homework itself and other resources had been through Show My Homework. And certainly for the first few weeks, I would say certainly the first 2 weeks of the lockdown, we were obviously sharing all resources through Show My Homework. And that's good as a tool itself. The only problem itself, of course, is after a while with Show My Homework, a lot of those resources, PowerPoints, what have you, do sometimes come down or get lost, as it were, and it's sometimes difficult to trace them. Then there were the issues as well with students and parents saying, oh, I don't have my login details, I've lost my particular password, can't log on, etc. And Show My Homework as a tool served us well, but I don't think it was ever designed for that volume of usage, certainly when lockdown was announced. And of course, there were problems sometimes with students submitting work back to their teachers for marking. And I think it was a bit clunky as a tool to use for students to return comments or work back to students. So then we had something else, which as a school, I don't know, Aidan, if you know much about us, but we opened in 2013. So we're still relatively new as a school. And when we opened back in 2013, we established what was known as a virtual learning environment. And then, of course, you had literally two platforms, Show My Homework and the VLE, kind of running side by side. And eventually, we just went over completely to using Show My Homework. But obviously, when lockdown was announced and 2 weeks into it, we suddenly thought, actually, the virtual learning environment is probably a safer platform to use. Will allow us to upload all our resources onto there without a fear of them being lost or coming down. Once they're on our VLE, they're on there in perpetuity, for as long as we want them to remain on there. And so what we've been doing, I would say, for the last 5 to 6 weeks is using our virtual learning environment that we've established. And obviously, it's a far more discreet forum as well, and it's only accessible to students and parents within the school community itself. Whereas if I go and Show My Homework, I can probably log on to any other school as well and find out what they're using as well for their students. Okay. Whereas the VLE, I suppose, that we have established as a school is a far more safer platform, but also allows us to more readily and more easily, allow us to return work back to students with feedback, and for students to submit, their work that they've finished back to their teachers. So, I suppose for us, the VLE has been, we've discovered in the last 5 weeks, a far more, I think a far more accessible at times, but also valuable platform. But also going forward and thinking about the future, from that moving forward and this new way of working that all students have had to adapt to, I think it's also going to be something that stands us in good stead well after, lockdown period is lifted and we return to normality, whatever that might look like. It will allow students just to sort of go home, access a lesson, a PowerPoint that they've actually had taught to them in class, go back and use it. At the moment, sometimes there's been this approach whereby, well, I've been taught that lesson in class, I didn't quite understand it or get all of it, I need to go back and ask that teacher the following day, whereas essentially you can upload all of your lessons onto the VLE students and parents can access that particular PowerPoint or resource at any given time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's really good, and I think you can log in then with your parents. Your parents can. There's more kind of joined up kind of community. One area I've spoken to some partner schools, and particularly next year, but parents' evenings seem unlikely to happen when schools open. How have you put any plans in place to how you might deal with that?
We haven't. I mean, at the moment, I mean, like a lot of schools, Chris, we're thinking about those particular tentative steps, how we go about reopening to year 10 and year 12. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the recent government guidelines and the announcements about, you know, some form of face-to-face contact with teachers of year 10 and year 12 students. So at the moment, obviously, all of our plans are based on how to effectively remodel the school so that we can admit students in, you know, numbers that will allow us to socially distance. And that's going to, it's more the logistical kind of sort of workings of making that, you know, successful, but also feasible as well. And I think, you know, we haven't yet thought about parents' evenings, especially, especially from a point of view of, you know, social distancing measures. But one of the things that we have discussed, a lot of schools often talk about academic review days. Are you familiar with those?
Yes, and certainly our viewers will be.
So we're kind of thinking that if we are going to do something like, you know, open evenings, and we haven't really actually sort of set anything down yet, but I think we were also, certainly for year 10, possibly thinking about academic review time slots where obviously you meet the form tutor.
Yeah.
Class teachers will obviously feed back their progress reports for individual students to the form tutor. You will then obviously have a form tutor meet through the course of 2 days, you know, whatever it is, or 1 day if it's possible, you know, 10 or 15-minute slots, such that students and their parents can come in and obviously social distance, so you haven't got an entire cohort or a whole year group in school hanging around waiting to see X-teacher. So I think, you know, that's what we've thought about at the moment. But as I said, nothing really in, you know, sort of in concrete.
We're a ways from it, aren't we? And you need to make decisions. But I think that you seem to be making huge strides in terms of linking, and it does link the parents and the pupils to the schools with technology. And doing it's great that you've got your own platform to do all that. And I think that's one of the positives and exciting things that that we can take away from this.
I think sorry.
No, it's fine. I was just gonna ask. I like to remain in the positive, but are there any? Is there anything that we've learned that? Do you know what? I know that I, as a parent, have learned how important schools are for social interaction with my children, and I've got a lot of respect for how much work teachers do. But is it really made you miss something? What do you think the big challenges are going to be around those year 10s or about starting again in September?
Well, I think like all heads, and I suppose all teachers, you sometimes worry about the amount of work that students are doing, the actual ability to actually maybe grasp concepts when you are essentially learning remotely. And I know that obviously teachers have done their best to differentiate, but also I suppose there's that in a school environment, you know, you have those assessment points. And of course you can't carry out assessments in the same way when students are learning remotely, and you can't often, you know, gauge the level of actually sort of understanding or the extent to which someone has grasped the concept when they are obviously learning from, you know, a distance, so to speak. So I think that's what's also occupying our own minds at the moment. We want to be supportive. I know obviously of some schools, some colleagues where they have sent out their assessments, you know, essentially to do these at home. But I think we've taken the view that if we are going to assess, these need to be modified. They can't be the assessments that we would have normally set students had they been in a normal classroom setting.
Yeah. Yeah, you wouldn't give someone the same maths paper or the same maths questions if they had a calculator, and if they didn't, would you? No. And in the same way, whatever assessment you're going to do, you're going to have a search engine and the ability to research around it. Yeah.
Of course. So those are sometimes, you know, the issues that have preoccupied our minds as well. On another note as well, we do know that obviously lots of parents have often asked, well, can we have things like, more, Zoom meetings or, teaching sessions or the use of Google Classrooms? And we looked at that, I must say, at the very beginning as well, but I'm sure you know as well that Zoom itself and Google Classrooms does pose particularly safeguarding risks and challenges. And we just took the decision that, I think, although it would be tempting to do that, we took the decision that we won't go down that particular path, that we will stick with the VLE. And what a lot of our teachers have been doing as well, certainly in recent weeks, is more pre-recorded, pre-recorded messages that go out to students. And at least that obviously guarantees the safety of both staff as well as students as well. So more of those kind of sort of voiceovers on PowerPoints, recorded messages, and I think, I know, so obviously you cannot there's no way that you can substitute face-to-face teaching. We know that. But I think we've had to be quite inventive, I think all of us nationally over the last 8 weeks.
Yes, no, and I don't know, I didn't really give you a lot of chance to introduce yourself in the school, and I should have done.
That's all right.
But it is a new school. It's you attempt to bring together the best of the independent and the state sectors.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think you do amazingly well. But because it's new, you do have the extra challenge of the building that you're currently in and the one that you're hoping to move into.
We do, yeah. I mean, obviously that's been an ongoing battle almost, or a challenge, since we opened back in 2013. I mean, in one sense, as a free school, we have been quite fortunate compared to maybe a lot of other free schools in that, the buildings that we have are not too bad. It's just that we lack certain facilities, and one of those has been a proper purpose-built gym. We don't have a gym, so as you probably know, Chris, all of our PE lessons take place in what limited grounds we do have, and in the canteen. Occasionally we will take them down to the local park, and obviously there are huge safeguarding sort of assessments and risk assessments that have to take place because of that. I suppose one of our buildings, an FE college, so we have at least the luxury of things like labs, proper labs for science. And as I said, other than the actual lack of gym facilities, most of the classrooms we have made into, nice teaching, learning spaces as well. And I suppose what really finally excited us at the beginning of this year, back in January, was the Secretary of State's, final decision in allowing us to go ahead and build, and granting permission. Sorry, excuse me again.
It's okay.
Allowing us to build. So, we're really excited at last that go-ahead has been given for us to obviously build. And, fortunately it will be, sorry, I'm really sorry about that.
Okay, no, because I know that we didn't have much time, so I'm starting to get progressively guilty about sucking it up. So,
don't worry. The building itself, fortunately, will be on the North London Business Park. So I think there was some nervousness about us eventually being granted permission to build, but maybe away from where we are at the moment. But fortunately, we will still be on the North London Business Park, and even better, we will remain undisturbed in our current buildings whilst the construction takes place.
Oh, that's fantastic, and it's a really ambitious and exciting design. So I think you'll really be state of the art when that finally gets done. Yeah. So that's lots of things to look forward to. And all that I was going to say, because I am aware that phone is ringing and you didn't have a huge amount of time, I will let you go, was thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for remaining open and looking after the pupils that you do. And we'll speak soon, I'm sure.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Appreciate it.
No worries.
Thank you.
Thanks. And cheers, Michael. Speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye. Bye, Aidan.
Bye.
Bye-bye.